I avoided Orion Hathor for 3 years, but had to meet him again. When he walked in, his arm was draped in a suit jacket, looking weary. Our eyes briefly met, and I involuntarily looked away. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Uncle Hathor smiled and greeted him. Orion, sit down. Today we are finally reunited as a family to welcome your sister. Orion looked at me and sneered. Sister? I only know she is my ex-girlfriend. May I ask, how did we become siblings? Uncle Hathor was so enraged that his face turned pale, and he slammed the chopsticks on the table. You unfilial child, come here. Orion obediently walked over, kicked the chair next to me with his foot, and sat down lazily, crossing his long legs with a look of provocation in his eyes. The once gentle and sunny youth had now become arrogant and wayward, for which I couldn't absolve myself of blame. Tension filled the atmosphere at the dining table. Mom gripped Uncle Hathor's hand tightly, and his expression softened slightly. Your sister has graduated and will start working at the company next week. You need to make arrangements. I was shocked. Mom only said she wanted me to come back to visit her, not to work at Hathor Group. Uncle Hathor, thank you for your concern, but I don't plan to work in the country. Mom glared at me. Amelia, we have a company. Why would you want to work for someone else? Yes, Amelia, how can I let you suffer outside? This company will be yours sooner or later. It was clear that Mom had Uncle Hathor under tight control. I couldn't understand how she could so comfortably claim everything as her own. Uncle Hathor Group has nothing to do with me. I will find a job on my own. Orion sat there for a while, with a look as if he was waiting to see how long I could pretend, and a hint of a playful smile at the corner of his mouth. Fine, the PR department needs a manager. You go. I don't want to. I instinctively refused. Orion laughed outright. The three of you have acted enough. If you want to work at the company, just come. Don't pretend to disgust me. You all have a good family reunion. I won't disturb you. With that, Orion got up and left. It seemed like he still saw me as a woman who coveted wealth and status. When we were in college, I pursued him persistently for 3 years, and everyone said I was after his money, but only I knew that when I first saw him, it was as if something had struck my heart, making me unable to resist getting closer to him, closer and closer. He was very loyal to his friends. The year my mother was laid off, he unhesitatingly introduced her to his father's company, but little did we know that my mother was the unrequited love of his father for many years. The day I and Orion confirmed our relationship, his father and my mother cheated on their spouses. That night, his mother jumped off the building and died. I knew from then on that there was no possibility for me and Orion. Between us, there was not only the barrier of sibling ethics, but also the barrier of his mother's death. I didn't know how to face him, so I chose to study abroad. At night, Orion brought a petite girl into the house, reeking of alcohol. He looked around and saw only me, smiling evilly. I think you won't mind if I bring a friend back to stay for a few days, right? Enough, let's just go inside. The girl complained in a delicate voice and pinched his abdominal muscles with her hand. Okay. Orion indulgently pinched her cheek and wrapped his arm around her waist, then went back to the room. My heart ached. Although I had heard that Orion indulged in wine and women all day, it was still hard to accept seeing it with my own eyes. My room was opposite Orion's. When I returned to my room, he happened to come out of his. He seemed much more sober, and we looked at each other in silence. I turned to leave, but the girl from his room came over and clung to his shoulder. Orion, what are you doing? The girl removed her makeup, revealing a fair and clean little face. Under the heavy makeup, her face looked very young. I looked her up and down, and alarm bells went off in my head. Orion, is she underage? Orion raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. The girl became anxious. It's none of your business whether I'm an adult or not. As a younger sister, you should stay away from your brother's affairs. No matter what, I will always be your brother's girlfriend. I became even more certain that she was indeed underage. I looked at him seriously. Orion, you can't do this. Orion was disdainful of my meddling, leaning lazily against the door. Either you join us, but I have no interest in incest, or in you. His words were extremely harsh, and I forced back the tears of grievance, looking him straight in the eye. Who you choose as a girlfriend is none of my business, but she is still a child. Orion's face suddenly darkened, his voice filled with anger. You're right, nothing I do has anything to do with you, but I just like her young and innocent, unlike you, who can't marry into the Hathor family and let your mother marry in, enjoying wealth and glory. Orion, I never wanted anything from the Hathor family. Your mother, don't mention her. Orion suddenly exploded in anger, staring at me with red eyes, gritting his teeth as he spoke. Amelia Dalton, you and your mother are both murderers. I hope you can sleep peacefully here. He pulled the girl's arm and pushed her into the room, not bothering to look at me again, and slammed the door in my face. My mother's tears and tantrums forced me to work for the Hathor Group. I didn't accept the position as head of the public relations department, but rather became an ordinary employee. On the first day of my job, the department head solemnly placed a stack of documents in front of me. Amelia, this is Mr. Patton's contract, assigned by Mr. Hathor for you to complete. I obediently nodded, but the head seemed hesitant to say something. Finally, he patted my shoulder and said, be smart about it. It wasn't until I actually met with Mr. Patton that I understood what the department head meant. Mr. Patton had all the qualities of a parvenu, with a greasy beer belly, and even his toes cannot be seen when he lowers his head. At the dinner table, his trouser leg kept brushing against my shin, and I endured the disgust to deal with him. The hint in his eyes should not be too obvious. We drank one glass after another without saying a word about the serious matter. Taking advantage of a gap when he was toasting with other colleagues, I sneaked out. I struggled to maintain consciousness and made it back home, where Orion was still awake, sitting on the couch. He didn't want to pay attention to me, and I didn't want to annoy him either. But as I stumbled, I ended up kneeling in the hallway. Orion came over and pulled me up, his tone cold. "Why did you drink so much?" Feeling the effects of the alcohol, I let go of his hand and smiled at him defiantly. "I'm just completing the task assigned by Mr. Hather. I assent this what you want to see?" Orion was taken aback by my words, knowing full well that he was deliberately making things difficult for me. Mr. Patton can be difficult, but his project is very important to the company. Orion's tone was very businesslike. Well, how could I expect him to show any pity for a former girlfriend he hated to the core? I smiled bitterly, reached out, and patted his shoulder firmly. "Don't worry, Mr. Hather, I will work hard to help you succeed." I kicked off my high heels and slowly made my way to the wall for support. Orion wanted to help me, his arm lifted and hesitated, but ultimately he stood still, watching me enter the room. I took a cold shower and came out, but my headache didn't ease at all. Instead, it got worse. I found a cup of honey water on the table. I sipped it slowly and remembered a gathering in college when I drank too much. Alcohol made me cry in front of many classmates, lamenting how hard it was to pursue Orion, and that I didn't want to pursue him anymore. Orion, who was always calm, suddenly panicked and frantically wiped away my tears. Before I completely blacked out that day, I heard him whispering in my ear, "Amelia, from now on, I will be the one pursuing you, okay?" Unfortunately, that was all in the past. Recalling the past made my headache even worse. When I got up carelessly, I accidentally overturned a chair and tripped over, making a loud noise. Almost immediately, Orion rushed in and half-knelt in front of me, checking if I had hit any bones. His face was close to mine, with no difference in features from before, just a lot more sorrow between his eyebrows. Driven by alcohol or instinct, I reached out and grabbed his tie, pulling him towards me with force. I kissed his lips, greedily feeling the warmth they transmitted. He didn't anticipate my move, and for a moment, his body stiffened, showing no reaction. When he came to his senses, he was extremely angry. He pushed me away, repeatedly rubbing his lips with the back of his hand, as if trying to wipe off something dirty. He glared at me, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Amelia, you are as despicable as your mother." I laughed at myself, but tears rolled down from the corners of my eyes. My head banged against the wall, causing a buzzing pain, but it seemed like my heart hurt even more. The man I loved so deeply described me with such vicious words. Perhaps he had every reason to hate me. If it weren't for me asking him to help my mother find a job, he would still have a warm family with both parents. I owed his mother a debt that I could never repay. I thought Orion was just trying to make things difficult for me, but I realized that this project is indeed very important to Hather Group. But Mr. Patton was very unhappy about my early departure last time, and it seems like I messed up this project. I hadn't figured out how to fix it yet, but Seth Patton took the initiative to approach me. When I arrived at the restaurant, I found out that he had booked a high-end couples restaurant. Gorgeous lights, the sound of violins, and handsome men and beautiful women dining together sweetly. And I was sitting across from a middle-aged, greasy man who reeked of copper. Seth Patton raised his hand and drank the red wine in his glass in one gulp, then wiped the corners of his mouth with a napkin. "How do you like it, Amelia? Are you satisfied with today's arrangement? Young girls like the atmosphere and sense of ceremony, but I think talking about money is the most practical." I felt a chill and forced myself to discuss business with him, despite feeling uncomfortable. I took out the proposal from my bag and handed it to him with both hands. "I left early last time due to health reasons. I'm truly sorry and have been wanting to find an opportunity to apologize to you. Our company has further improved the proposal, and we have provided detailed explanations of the specific cooperation details, which represents our company's sincerity. Please take a look." To my surprise, he didn't even look at it. He simply took the proposal and threw it aside, then took the opportunity to touch the back of my hand. "Amelia, sincerity is not shown like this. Look at the great atmosphere in this restaurant. It's not very suitable for discussing business, is it? Mr. Patton, our company really values this cooperation. We hope you can consider it. Amelia, you are a smart girl. Whether you can secure this cooperation for your company depends on your performance." Seth Patton's intentions were clear. There was a lecherous gleam in his eyes, and under the table, he raised his foot and rubbed it against my calf. I jumped up suddenly. "Mr. Patton, please behave yourself." At this point, I turned and left, but Seth Patton stood up and grabbed my arm, pulling me into his embrace from behind. His breath sprayed on my neck, making me feel nauseous. He held me still, and to onlookers, it looked like we were having a romantic conversation. The commotion attracted some curious glances from other customers. I was both anxious and annoyed, but then I heard a familiar voice beside me. "What are you doing?" Orion stood in front of me, frowning, with a pretty girl behind him. As Seth Patton loosened his grip, I broke free suddenly. He straightened his suit and smiled sarcastically at Orion. "Mr. Hathor, it seems like your company's employees lack manners." "Oh, how so?" "They talk about your company's sincerity, but there's no action to back it up." Seth Patton's words had a hint of ambiguity as he glanced at me. I shivered, worried that Orion might push me to the fat man for the project. After all, I was his ex-girlfriend and his enemy. "Mr. Patton, what are you talking about? We will naturally meet the client's requirements." Orion's words were light, and my heart turned cold. There was probably nothing more ridiculous in the world than being handed over to someone else by the man I loved. "Ha ha ha, okay." Seth Patton burst into laughter, his fat face covering his eyes. "Now that Mr. Hathor has spoken, I'll take Amelia with me." As he reached out to grab me, Orion kicked him in the stomach before he could touch me, sending him flying. "You dare touch her and see what happens." I was startled. Orion put all his strength into that kick, and Seth Patton lay on the ground gasping for air. Orion picked up the proposal on the table, tore it in half, and threw it at Seth Patton's face. "You are no longer a client of our company. Take your project and get lost." Seth Patton, clutching his stomach in pain, no longer cared about his dignity and shouted angrily at Orion. "Orion, you are outrageous. Even your father wouldn't dare touch me here today." Orion walked slowly to him, squatted down, and arrogantly patted his chubby face. "Seth Patton, I don't have the patience of my father. If you dare to harass Amelia again, I will cripple you." Orion leisurely took off his frameless glasses, wiped the lenses with his shirt, put them back on, and scornfully glanced at Seth Patton before speaking slowly. "If you want to try, I'll accompany you to the end." I followed Orion out of the restaurant, but he was still angry. "Are you just going to let that old man take advantage of you like that?" Orion yelled at me without any restraint. I was also very angry at being taken advantage of for no reason, so I retorted angrily, "How was I supposed to break free? Why did you meet him alone then? Was it you who was so eager to get this project?" I left Orion speechless with my questions, his chest heaving up and down, and finally he spoke in a subdued voice. "I wouldn't stoop so low as to use you to secure the project. Don't do something like this again in the future. Your safety is the most important." He said my safety was the most important, and I felt a strange warmth in my heart. Although he hated me, it seemed like he wasn't completely cold-hearted. My foot had been twisted during the struggle just now, and it was starting to hurt. I couldn't help but let out a cry.